Hello there. Welcome to the bookstore. This is Mason's Used Books, and I am Mason. What brings you in today? Looking for some books. Well, I guess that makes sense, doesn't it? Would you like some help picking out a book today? You would? Lovely. Well, I happen to have a stack of some of my favorites right here. So maybe I can recommend some of these. Do you have a specific genre that you're looking for, or are you just kind of trying to stay open? No? No specific genre? Well, great. I'll start going through stuff then. The first thing I have here, actually was still working on inventory in this. It's The Last Kingdom by Bernard Cornwell. I actually just caught up with watching this show on Netflix called The Last Kingdom, based on these books. I believe it's a trilogy of titles. Historical fiction, takes place during the time of King Alfred in England in I believe the 800s. Alfred and his Anglo-Saxons fighting off the Vikings, essentially. A very good TV adaptation, and very faithful to the book as well. I highly recommend it. It follows a mercenary of sorts named Uhtred, who is born English but is raised by the Vikings, and then has to make a choice on who he wishes to serve, and he ends up serving King Alfred of England with inconsistent loyalty, but it's quite entertaining. What I have here is in fairly good condition, but it's been well loved. This book comes in at about 330 pages, and there's a second and a third title in this series. All quite good. Yeah, very nice historical fiction. Here, I'll read the back for you. In the middle years of the 9th century, the fierce Danes stormed onto British soil, hungry for spoils and conquest. Kingdom after kingdom fell to the ruthless invaders until but one realm remained, and suddenly the fate of all England, in the course of history, depended upon one man, one king. From New York Times best-selling storyteller Bernard Cornwell comes a rousing epic adventure of courage, treachery, duty, devotion, majesty, love, and battle, as seen through the eyes of a young warrior who straddled two worlds. Sound interesting at all? Maybe? I'll set this one aside. Very interesting if you're interested in history at all, but don't want to read a non-fiction book. This bridges the gap nicely. Let's stick with the theme of swords and battles. This one's a little thicker. This one's called The Sword of Shannara. This is actually another that that has been made into a television show. MTV did it, of all channels, I believe. This is a fantasy book from the 70s. I want to say 1977, same year Star Wars came out. The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks. This is also a series, but this is a much longer series. However, there's a core trilogy, of which this is the first book. The second novel in this series was turned into a television show. It was kind of like a young adult show, definitely aimed at teens and young adults. However, the books are not young adult novels. They're pretty pretty average fantasy. If you enjoy things like Lord of the Rings or Aragon, other popular books like that, then you'll certainly like these. They have a lot in common with things like Lord of the Rings. This one in particular, I'll read the back cover for you. Long ago, the wars of the ancient evil ruined the world. In peaceful Shady Vale, half-elfin Shay Almsford knows little of such troubles. But the supposedly dead Warlock Lord is plotting to destroy everything in his wake. The sole weapon against this power of darkness is the Sword of Shannara, which can be used only by a true heir of Shannara. On Shay, last of the bloodline, rests the hope of all the races. So yeah, that basically sums it up in this book. It actually has some pictures in it. They're very faint, but there's some pictures of some of the action in there. So if you're into fantasy and looking for something new, this could be interesting. I feel like these books sort of have a cult following. I frankly had never heard of them until the TV show came out. But I was definitely missing out on a good novel. However, at over 700 pages, this is going to be a tough read, especially since there are 3 books. However, this stands on its own. This can be a standalone book, but definitely need to devote some time if you're looking to read these. Let's grab something more recent. This is Neverworld Wake by Marisha Pessel. This is this author's 3rd work. I remember when her first book came out and I read it. It was her very first work as an author, and I quite enjoyed it. It was just kind of an average, everyday slice of life almost. So it was a little odd. I couldn't figure out why I liked it, but it was just interesting. But it had a lot of pop culture references and literary references that I feel like most people might not get all of them, and that's fine. But this book, her most recent, is a departure from that. This is, in fact, very clearly a young adult novel. When I read it, I got that impression, and that's fine. But it perhaps a bit outside my scope of interest at the moment. But I would call this leaning on fantasy. Essentially, these teenagers all get into a car crash and presumably die, but then they get stuck in this weird sort of purgatory where they keep living the same day over and over again. Whenever they wake up, they experience the same day. And essentially they need to all accomplish something unfinished business, essentially, before moving on. It becomes more complex than that, but essentially that's the case. And so there's a lot of time spent, people were saying, what's the point? And just start partying and going crazy. But of course, after hundreds of days, an eternity, you get tired. This is definitely an easy read, at only just over 300 pages and not a lot of words per page. As you can see, pretty big line spacing there. Okay, there is a description on the inside flap this time. Once upon a time, back at Darrow Harker School, Beatrice Hartley and her 5 best friends were the cool kids, the beautiful ones. Then the shocking death of Jim, their creative genius and Beatrice's boyfriend, changed everything. 1 year after graduation, Beatrice is returning to Wincroft, the seaside estate where they spent so many nights sharing secrets, crushes, plans to change the world. hoping she'll get to the bottom of the dark questions gnawing at her about Jim's death. She suspects that her friends know much more than they ever let on. But as the night plays out in a haze of awkward jokes and unfathomable silence, Beatrice senses she's never going to know what really happened. Then night fades to morning, a thunderstorm rages, and a mysterious man knocks on the door. Blithely, he announces the impossible. Time for them has become stuck, snagged on a splinter that can only be removed if the former friends make the harshest of decisions. Now Beatrice has one last shot at answers, and at life. And so begins the Neverworld Wake. Acclaimed New York Times best-selling author of Night Film and special topics in calamity physics, Marisha Pessl creates a vivid and unsettling realm in this atmospheric and absorbing psychological suspense novel, sure to keep readers breathless until the riveting conclusion. Sounds pretty good. And I will say, it did keep me interested the entire time. This is a well-written book that definitely will keep you on the edge of your seat, because it's hard to guess what's going to happen next. There's some things that are predictable and cliche, more so than I would expect from previous works by this author, but that doesn't mean they're bad. It's quite a good book, and I would definitely recommend it for a lighter, quicker read. Now, I know I keep delving into sci-fi and fantasy, but frankly, that's a lot of what we have here. Sci-fi and fantasy books often come in paperback, and we carry a lot of paperbacks. Have you ever seen the movie Blade Runner? They made Blade Runner 2049 pretty recently, but have you seen the original? You have? Okay. Fantastic, because did you know that it was actually based off of a book? You didn't? Well, I present to you Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Yeah, how'd you get that from Blade Runner? But, as you may notice, the word Blade Runner is never mentioned in the movie Blade Runner and makes no sense. So, this is the inspiration for Blade Runner, not necessarily a sort of shot-for-shot adaptation. It's quite short. It comes in at under 250 pages. This book is by Philip K. Dick, who is definitely a prolific sci-fi writer from the 60s and 70s and stuff. I began writing in 1952, ultimately producing 36 novels and 5 short story collections. So, quite the prolific writer. I'll go ahead and read the back of this book as well. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep was published in 1968. Grim and foreboding, even today it is a masterpiece ahead of its time. By 2021, next year, the World War had killed millions, driving entire species into extinction and sending mankind off planet. Those who remained coveted any living creature, and for people who couldn't afford one, companies built incredibly realistic simulacra: horses, birds, cats, sheep. They even built humans. Immigrants to Mars received androids so sophisticated it was impossible to tell them from true men or women. Fearful of the havoc these artificial humans could wreak, the government banned them from Earth. But when androids didn't want to be identified, they just blended in. Rick Deckard was an officially sanctioned bounty hunter whose job was to find rogue androids and to retire them. But when cornered, androids tended to fight back, with deadly results. So yeah, this does have a lot of the same plot points. And I forget if, not to spoil the ending, but I mean, you've already seen Blade Runner. I'm trying to remember if this book is more conclusive about the implications at the end. this one might be also ambiguous about the possible android ending. I think it sort of implies that it, maybe doesn't matter. But anyways, highly recommend it if you're into science fiction and sort of want to see the inspiration behind some of those things. When it comes to science fiction, there's a lot of things based off books. There's a lot of books based on movies. Another one is 2001: A Space Odyssey. The book and the movie were actually written at the same time, which is kind of unique. But yeah, this inspiration for Blade Runner, kind of a necessary read if you're into science fiction. Here's something a little different. If you're into non-fiction, I present to you Super Freakonomics. It's a sequel to a book called Freakonomics. Not really a sequel, more like just another edition that talks about more things. The description on the front is global cooling, patriotic prostitutes, and why suicide bombers should buy life insurance. It's a funny, comedic look at data, really, and just the way that people think, and the way that things in the world work. Let me see if I can turn to anything. It's been a long time since I've read this myself. Oh man. Yeah, lots of charts and data, of course, but presented in a very entertaining way. How is a street prostitute like a department store Santa? That's the name of one of the chapters. But yeah, definitely examines the economy or the economic state through a unique lens. And if you're into business, or even if you're not, even if you're just kind of into how the world works and how people think, I'd highly recommend reading this. I'll go ahead and read the back. What's more dangerous, driving drunk or walking drunk? What's the best way to catch a terrorist? Can a sex change boost your salary? The New York Times best-selling Freakonomics was a worldwide sensation. Now Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner return with Super Freakonomics, and fans and newcomers alike will find that the frequel is even bolder, funnier, and more surprising than the first. Super Freakonomics challenges the way we think all over again, exploring the hidden side of everything, with such questions as, how is a street prostitute like a department store Santa? Who adds more value, a pimp or a realtor? What do hurricanes, heart attacks, and highway deaths have in common? Did TV cause a rise in crime? Can eating kangaroo meat save the planet? Whether investigating a solution to global warming or explaining why the price of oral sex has fallen so drastically, Levitt and Dubner show the world for what it really is: good, bad, ugly, and in the final analysis, super freaky. There's also a Freakonomics podcast, which I quite enjoy listening to, hosted by these two authors, and they're funny guys. I believe they do a lot of live shows as well, but their books are certainly essential to read if you're into anything like that. Now let's take a look at a couple classics. Now, a fun fact about me, I actually share a birthday with Ernest Hemingway, July 21st. So, an essential part of my collection to sell in this store is the works of Ernest Hemingway. This is the first 49 stories, which is a collection of Hemingway short stories, an anthology, if you will, and really some of the most iconic ones are in here. I remember reading Hills Like White Elephants in college, for example, and I think I was familiar with a couple other of these before even picking this up. You'll probably recognize a lot of titles in here, and it's all very interesting. There's some that talks about his time in the war. I believe he was in World War I. There's a lot about American living in that time, wandering living in small towns, traveling Europe. There's a lot of stuff in here, some common themes, a lot of bullfighting as well. He spent a lot of time in Spain. So, a lot of interesting perspectives and, something that we living in the 21st century, it's some perspectives that are particularly interesting to us because some things change, some things stay the same. Just the way that people's personalities are. There's a lot of things that have fundamentally changed if these stories are any point of accuracy. I'll go ahead and read the back on this one as well. There's a preface from Ernest Hemingway within the book. There are many kinds of stories in this book. I hope you will find some that you like, and going where you have to go, and doing what you have to do, and seeing what you have to see. You dull and blunt the instrument you write with. But I would rather have it bent and dulled, and know I had to put it on the grindstone and hammer it into shape, and put a whetstone to it, and know that I had something to write about, than to have it bright and shining and nothing to say, or smooth and well oiled in the closet, but unused. Which is a very interesting perspective in itself. He's admitting not all of these stories are necessarily great, but I would rather have written something than nothing at all. And I think that's a great way to look at it. You should always be creating. Ernest Hemingway wrote 49 short stories that are in this book, and this is not all of his writings. This is a ton of writing, though. It's just over 450 pages of short stories, and there's some good ones. So if you're at all interested in fiction, but maybe not super current fiction, I'd recommend it. Now, if you're willing to go even older, in fact, one of the oldest, I have this new condition, I think maybe unread or very lightly read, copy of Homer's The Iliad and the Odyssey, both essential Greek myths, stories that you need to read. They're a bit of a chore to get through, but that's because they're classics and they've been translated. But this copy has an embossed cover, has gold leaf pages. It's a very nice copy. Yes, the Iliad and the Odyssey cover. Well, the Iliad covers some battles. It goes into great detail about the Trojan War and the heroes of that war. And the Odyssey, of course, takes place after that as Odysseus heads home and faces many trials along the way back. There's the Cyclops, there's a ton of other temptations, and then he has to come back to his home and essentially fight for his throne again, essentially. Very, very good stories, classic stories, but a bit of a chore to get through. A lot of characters, archaic writing style. But I think for anyone interested in history or mythology or storytelling or even just reading and writing in general, these are essential. I read both of these in high school even, or at least good chunks of them. So I think that they're great for anyone to read, and I would highly recommend it. And this great condition book may not stick around for long. The last book I have in my pile here is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This is a book I discovered a little while ago, and since then I've been hearing Brandon Sanderson's name everywhere. He's incredibly popular right now, and the Mistborn trilogy is certainly one of his best and most popular. It follows a girl named Vin who discovers her powers. That's a very vague description, but essentially there's people in this world, this fantasy world, that have powers, and it's different. It's not quite elemental powers. It's very unique. It has to do with metals, It's a unique take on powers. So I'm going to go ahead and read the description of this one too. Once a hero arose to save the world. A young man with a mysterious heritage courageously challenged the darkness that strangled the land. He failed. For 1,000 years since, the world has been a wasteland of ash and mist, ruled by the immortal emperor known as the Lord Ruler. Every revolt has failed miserably. Yet somehow, hope survives. Hope that dares to dream of ending the empire and even the Lord Ruler himself. A new kind of uprising is being planned, one built around the ultimate caper, one that depends on the cunning of a brilliant criminal mastermind and the determination of an unlikely heroine. A street urchin who must learn to master allomancy, the power of a mistborn. So yeah, a lot, definitely fantasy still. We actually have the rest of the trilogy here in stock in a box. I'm just going to put this back on the shelf since I was in the middle of inventorying these and putting them back. But yes, I would highly recommend the Mistborn trilogy if you're into fantasy. It's a very unique one, and Brandon Sanderson is an excellent writer. Anyways, that's all the books that I have to show you. Feel free to look around some more. I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope this was helpful. Feel free to ask any more questions as you're browsing. I can definitely recommend some more books, but this should be a great starting point. And hey, thanks for coming in. I appreciate it.